There are moments in life when you don't plan to become the villain. You just refuse to let good people get crushed by greed. 15 years have passed since this happened, but I still remember the exact second my blood started boiling. The kind of anger that makes your ears ring, your jaw lock, and your brain slow down. Not because you're confused, but because something inside you has snapped into focus. My best friend, Leah, was sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking as she held her phone, eyes glassy, voice barely above a whisper. "They changed the price," she said. "They didn't even tell us." Leah and her husband, Marcus, had 5 kids. 5. Not by accident, not irresponsibly. 5 children they loved fiercely and raised with discipline, structure, and a whole lot of sacrifice. They weren't lazy. They weren't reckless. They were just normal people trying to survive in a city that punished anyone who wasn't already rich. They'd been renting this old 4-bedroom house for years. It was run down. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The drains smelled no matter how often you cleaned them. The paint peeled. The wallpaper bubbled. The floorboards groaned like they were tired of holding everyone up. But it was home. And most importantly, it was affordable. The original owner, a woman named Margaret, was one of those rare people whose wealth hadn't eaten her humanity. She was old money, the kind that didn't need to show itself. She liked Leah. She admired how hard she worked, how she kept the house clean despite the chaos of 5 kids, how she never complained. Margaret froze their rent for 5 years. 5 years. And then she made them a promise. "When you're ready," she'd said, patting Leah's hand one afternoon, "you can buy the house. Same price. No rush. Just save." And Leah and Marcus believed her, because Margaret had done this before. Helped families who needed a foothold. Gave them a chance to climb instead of kicking the ladder away. So they saved. They skipped holidays. They wore clothes until they fell apart. Leah took extra shifts. Marcus worked overtime whenever it was offered. Every spare dollar went into that savings account. 5 years later, they were finally ready. They called Margaret. 2 days later, she died. No paperwork had been signed yet. Nothing official. Just a promise hanging in the air, suddenly without the person who made it. The house passed to her 4 children. That's when the nightmare began. At first, the children were polite, warm, even. They told Leah and Marcus not to worry, that they'd honor their mother's wishes. Probate would take some time, but the sale would go ahead as planned. Relieved, my friends did something that would later be thrown back in their faces. They started fixing the place up. They stripped wallpaper, repainted walls, made plans, dreamed out loud with their kids about which room would belong to who forever. Not just for now, forever. Then probate settled. And suddenly the tone changed. The price had gone up. $80,000. No warning. No conversation. Just a number. Worse, the house was going to be listed publicly. Open house in 7 days. 7 days. Leah told me the bank rejected their loan because the new asking price pushed them over the limit. They might be able to borrow more, but not in a week. If the house sold to someone else, their rent would skyrocket, or they'd be evicted. And in that area, finding a 4-bedroom place they could afford was basically impossible. They weren't just losing a house. They were losing stability. I listened quietly. Let her talk. Let her cry. Inside, something dark and calm settled into place. Because those 4 siblings didn't need the money. They owned half the damn city. This was a necessity. It wasn't survival. It was greed. And greed deserved consequences. I didn't tell Leah what I was planning. Not at first. She was already overwhelmed, scrambling to talk to brokers, family, anyone who might help them scrape together the extra money. Marcus barely slept. The kid sensed something was wrong and started acting out in that way children do when their world feels unstable. Meanwhile, I researched what makes a house sell fast, and more importantly, what makes people walk away. We needed to make the place unattractive without crossing the line. No damage, no vandalism, nothing that could get Leah and Marcus blamed or sued. Just persuasion. First, clutter. Minimalist homes sell. Spacious homes sell. So we did the opposite. Furniture was dragged away from walls. Extra chairs appeared. Bookshelves were stuffed. We borrowed ornaments from friends and filled every surface. Motorcycle memorabilia went up on the walls. Helmets, jackets, framed photos. The house felt smaller, tighter, like it was closing in on you. Next, smell. Smell is powerful. It bypasses logic. On the morning of the open house, Leah boiled cabbage. Slowly, thoroughly. The kind of smell that clings to your sinuses and makes you rethink your life choices. I sprayed ammonia lightly near the front and back doors. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest that something animal had been marking its territory. Then came the drains. 24 rotten eggs, cracked and poured down. The place smelled like sewer gas and regret. Outside, we worked on the neighborhood. Across the road, with permission, we placed an old moldy couch in the front yard. It looked abandoned, uncared for. Then I started calling in favors. Anyone with a loud, terrible car was asked to drive past during the open house. Over and over. Reverend Backfire crawled past like they were lost. By midday, the street sounded like a racetrack. Finally, the piece de resistance. I called the rugby boys. Big men, loud men, covered in tattoos and scars. The kind of guys real estate brochures don't want loitering nearby. The neighbor next door set up a barbecue. We offered free food, cheap beer. Motorcycles lined the street, leather jackets, heavy boots, laughter that carried. It looked like chaos. The open house began. People arrived and left quickly. Some barely stepped inside before turning around. One woman sat in her car for a full minute, watched the barbecue, the bikes, the traffic, and drove off without even opening her door. One man stayed longer. Curious, brave, maybe hopeful. He talked to someone from the barbecue. "Is it always like this?" he asked. "Oh, yeah," the guy replied cheerfully. "Every couple of weeks. After parties, too. Big ones. Sometimes loud all night." Then, as if remembering something important, "Oh, and the drains? Nightmare. Tree roots. Always backing up. Smells awful." The man nodded, left, never came back. By the end of the day, only one offer had been made. Leah and Marcus. Higher than planned, but not as high as the greedy siblings wanted. They signed, paid the deposit. Then, hours later, another offer came in, $30,000 higher. Too late. Anti-gazumping laws meant the owners couldn't do a damn thing. I've never seen relief and disbelief mix so perfectly on someone's face. The sale went through. The kids stayed in their rooms. The house became theirs. And those 4 wealthy siblings lost money. Not because of bad luck, but because they underestimated how far people will go when you threaten their family. I sometimes imagine their faces when they realized what happened. How their plan backfired. How their greed cost them. They still got paid. Just not as much as they wanted. And Leah? She still lives there. The drains were fixed. The kitchen renovated. The wallpaper replaced with memories. 15 years later, the house is worth more than those siblings could ever imagine. And every time I drive past, I smile, because sometimes revenge doesn't need violence, just strategy and the courage to protect people who deserve better. And with that, our story comes to an end, but the real story begins with your thoughts. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments.